want to thank everyone for joining us. This afternoon, this morning, depending on where you're at in the country right now. And I want to make sure to note some important requirements as we conduct this official remote hearing. Let me begin by just saying that the standing House and committee rules and practice will continue to apply during remote proceedings. So all members are reminded that they are expected to adhere to these standing rules, including decorum. With that said, during the covered period as designated by the Speaker, the committee will operate in accordance to HRes 965 and the subsequent guidance from the Rules Committee in a manner that respects the rights of all members to participate. House regulations require members to be visible through a video connection throughout the proceedings. So please keep your cameras on. And also, if you have to participate in another proceeding, please exit this one and then log back on later. In the event a member encounters technical issues that prevents them from being recognized for their questioning, I will move to the next available member of the same party, and I will recognize that member at the next appropriate time slot, provided they have returned to the proceedings. Should a member's time be interrupted by technical issues, I will recognize that member at the next appropriate spot for the remainder of their time once their issues have been resolved. In the event a witness loses connectivity during testimony or questioning, I will preserve their time as staff addresses the technical issues. I may need to recess the proceedings to provide time for the witness to reconnect. And hopefully we don't have any of those issues, but here's to hoping it all works out. And finally, remember to remain muted until you are recognized to minimize background noise. In accordance with the rules established under HRes 965, staff have been advised to mute participants only in the event that there is an inadvertent background noise. Should a member wish to be recognized, they must first unmute themselves and then seek recognition at the appropriate time. And so, first of all, before we really get started here, I want to start by recognizing the Iowans in my community and across the state who I know have gone through so much over the last month, obviously during the pandemic as well, but we got hit really with a double whammy here in Iowa and in this district which was essentially a Category 4 hurricane-style winds came through large parts of my district. It was 140 mile per hour winds that took down trees that have been standing for 150, 200 years. And, I know the city of Cedar Rapids and the surrounding areas have been through a lot. I know the floods back in 2008 and also in 16 even, but this is just on a different scale. In 2008, there was about 14 square miles that were affected, and the city of Cedar Rapids itself was 75 square miles, all affected, plus then the surrounding areas, Marion, Hiawatha, all of Lynn County, essentially, and then our surrounding counties as well, Buchanan, Poweshiek, Tama, Marshall, just to name a few, Iowa County. And some of our witnesses that are here are actually the two witnesses from Iowa also have had to go through that, whether it's damage to their own businesses or to their homes. And we are very grateful. I know when you agreed to be a part of this, we were going to talk about kind of the economic recovery as we go through the pandemic and then hopefully come out of it, and how do we keep things going and do things right and make sure we're addressing the right challenges here. And then on top of it now, we have a whole new host of challenges that we are dealing with here in Iowa. And as one of our witnesses I spoke to this morning, Mr. Kettleson, told me, we're Iowans, we get through this, but it's still going to be tough. And we are just really grateful to have, I know, Jeremy and Chad with us to kind of have those discussions. And then also our other witnesses here too from throughout the country. I know in Vermont and Ohio as well. And you guys have been through a lot with the pandemic piece. So just very, very grateful. And I know, obviously we all are still going through this pandemic, and in Iowa in particular, just for some numbers, we've actually had 69,000 folks that have tested positive with COVID-19, and we've lost over 1,100 Iowans. And we know that there's still a long way to go here. But we need to make sure we're doing everything we can. I know this has also caused, obviously, a huge hardship for our small businesses due to the downturn in our economy then. And 7.5 million small businesses are now at risk of closure, and many of them are in our rural areas. What's especially frustrating is that we've also spent nearly a decade recovering from the recession in '08, only to now have our rural economies take another devastating hit. So the recession had a lasting and disproportionate impact on rural America. 2 out of every 3 rural counties experienced a decline in their total number of businesses and a decline in their population as families left to find different opportunities. And this is actually something that I saw happen firsthand in my home state of Iowa. In Iowa, much like the rest of the country, recovery took hard work. Iowans took very big risks to start their own businesses, and it paid off. I mean, in 2016, nearly 1,900 new businesses started in Iowa, creating 7,000 new jobs. And this didn't happen in Iowa, though. This happened across the country. In 2017, America's small businesses created 8.4 million new jobs across the country. But not every community bounced back from the recession. And there are still places, especially in rural areas, that have never been able to bring back the jobs and opportunities that they lost. And now, as we deal with the fallout from this pandemic, we need to make sure that no businesses or communities are left behind. And recently, I introduced the Unlocking Opportunities in Emerging Markets Act, which would create a new office at Small Business Administration to focus entirely on how can we help improve access to capital for underrepresented entrepreneurs, like in those rural areas, people of color, women, our nation's veterans. This is just one of the many bipartisan bills that are being put forward to help our small business owners to be successful in the long term, which is what we need to continue to be thinking about as well. I know that all of my colleagues here today have been working hard to come up with new ideas and solutions to help get our economy back on track. And for that, I'm very, very thankful to get to be on this committee with you all. That's why we wanted to hold this hearing, is to hear directly from America's rural small business owners and what they need to move forward and what the pandemic has meant for their business. I look forward to hearing from our policy experts about how rural America can be a catalyst for job creation across the country and how there is opportunities here if we do this right, moving through this pandemic, to make sure we have the right things in rural America, whether it's broadband, and create those opportunities. So as folks are looking at, if they're in bigger cities right now, wanting to move back home to the small towns they're from, that they have those opportunities to do it. But we also have to do our job then on the federal level, working with our local folks, but also the states, to ensure that we have connectivity and that we make sure that there is a place for folks to go in the first place and have those opportunities. So I also, before I pass it over to Ranking Member Joyce, I want to say thank you for joining us, Ranking Member Dr. Joyce. It's been great to get to work with you over the last year and a half, and happy to have you here today, and would love to pass it over to you and yield to you for your opening statement. Oh, I think you've got to unmute, Dr. Joyce. There you go.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer. Thank you for your leadership. I send my greetings from my district office in Somerset, Pennsylvania, where tomorrow we will hold a memorial of the Flight 93 tragedy which occurred on 9/11. Echoing the sentiments from my district, tomorrow will be a somber day, and yet we are all in stages of recovery, which we will continue. In this subcommittee, this important subcommittee on rural development, agriculture, trade, and entrepreneurship, we have discussed the importance of economic development and of rejuvenation of America's small businesses. The global pandemic has only underscored the importance of these small businesses. And while there is little data that is truly available on the number of rural small businesses, some estimate that there are approximately 5.5 million rural small businesses in the United States. We know, particularly on this subcommittee, that small businesses are a critical component of the rural economy, which makes them a focal point of many federal rural economic development efforts. Rural small businesses do indeed differ from urban and suburban small firms in many ways. Generally, rural firms are more likely to be profitable long term and typically more successful than non rural firms in getting financing. Additionally, rural businesses tend to be smaller in size, smaller in revenue, and often smaller in growth opportunities. We've had multiple hearings on the major challenges experienced by rural small businesses, including inadequate access to rural broadband, fewer methods to access capital, higher healthcare costs with limited access to rural physicians, increased childcare expenses, and workforce shortages. We know that small towns and rural communities struggle with these issues each and every day. But the coronavirus pandemic has continued to bring these issues to the forefront of our nation's attention. About 46 million Americans live in rural areas, and unfortunately, some rural residents are at increased risk of getting COVID 19. Demographic characteristics and geographic features, coupled with reduced healthcare, disrupt the ability of rural regions to respond to the pandemic. The slowdown in aggregate demand has affected some primary sectors, and the expected further slowdown in trade and global demand might continue to negatively impact rural economies. And due to these factors, we must be proactive in our goal of helping America's Main Street to recover. Unfortunately, we find ourselves once again discussing the persistent challenges that we in rural communities face every single day. As this issue has yet to receive a resolution, we have witnessed in real time the destructive lack of access to healthcare, telehealth, and broadband, specifically in our rural communities. The question is no longer what is the issue, but whether what can we do? In partnership with private and nonprofit organizations, we can increase access to these life-saving and life-providing resources in order to create equitable opportunity for rural small businesses. The Hill recently released an article discussing the significant dynamic of Americans who are moving in waves to suburban and rural areas. Some reasons cited include the pandemic, social unrest, and economic uncertainty. While the permanency and benefit of this change remains to be seen, we will assess the impact that this will have on our communities as our economics continue to recover and the pandemic continues to slow. Now, when we see a great migration from cities to rural and suburban communities, we must not only talk about the strain on resources, but we must discern how to leverage these resources so that we can retain those who have moved into our communities and foster the opportunities for further growth and development. For these pressing issues, I'm proud to work with you on this committee where we host witnesses on a wealth of knowledge on these specific and can come up with bipartisan solutions that benefit all of our nation's rural communities. It is imperative that we learn from those who, like our panel today, know what it's like to steer a small business through a pandemic. I look forward to hearing the testimony of our witnesses today and to the continued partnership and bipartisan nature of this subcommittee. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. The gentleman yields back. And if committee members have an opening statement prepared, we'd ask that they be submitted for the record. I would like to just take a minute now to explain the timing rules. Each witness gets 5 minutes to testify, and then each member gets 5 minutes for questioning. There's a lighting system to assist you. You can kind of see it. It's under the L thanks if you see that on the screen there where it says 5 minutes. The green light, if you watch that, will be on when you begin. And then the yellow light comes on when you have 1 minute remaining. The red light comes on when you're out of time, and we ask that you stay within the time frame to the best of your ability. And I hope, again, everyone can see the little timer right there. And then now I'd like to introduce our witnesses. I would now like to introduce our first witness, Mr. Nath. Chad. Mr. Chad Nath is the director of Link Grinnell, a nonprofit organization that offers daycare and after school care. Link, which stands for Lead, Inspire, Nurture, and Keep, aims to provide a safe and inclusive learning environment for all children. Mr. Nath holds a BA in education from Buena Vista University and has held positions as a kindergarten and special education teacher, and then also worked in healthcare sector as well. Mr. Nath, you've done a lot, and you've done it all in our rural areas and in Grinnell, and we're very, very grateful to have you here. So welcome, Mr. Nath. And then our second witness is Mr. Jeremy Kettleson. Mr. Kettleson is the vice president of Kettleson RV, located in Hiawatha, Iowa. Kettleson RV began as a small RV business on the family farm in 1962 when Mr. Kettleson's grandfather wanted a camper. The business opened a storefront in Marion, Iowa, and later started a service department, a parts department, and eventually a sales department. And Mr. Kettleson, we're really happy to have you here. It was great to chat with you and Mr. Nath this morning, and really interested to hear kind of how you're hanging in there with, yes, both the pandemic and the derecho now. So welcome, Mr. Kettleson. And then our third witness is Mr. Rembert. Mr. Rembert is a regional economist and head of the Rural Innovation Network and are at the Center on Rural Innovation in Heartland, Vermont. He started in this line of work when his hometown of Wilmington, Ohio, I know we've got another Ohioan with us today as well, faced the loss of 10,000 jobs during the recession. It led him to co-found the nonprofit Energize Clinton County in 2008 and later serve as the executive director of the Wilmington Clinton County Chamber of Commerce. He holds a PhD in regional economics from The Ohio State University. I watch a lot of football. And then Department of Agriculture, Environmental and Development Economics. Welcome, Mr. Rembert. And then I would now like to yield to our ranking member, Dr. Joyce, to introduce our final witness.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer. Our final witness is Jason Duff, founder and CEO of Small Nation, a company in Bellefontaine, Ohio, that revitalizes small towns and helps small town entrepreneurs across the country. Jason is a fourth generation in a family of entrepreneurs and grew up gaining firsthand knowledge of how entrepreneurship, good financial practices, and hard work can bring great success. After graduating from the Ohio Northern University with a Bachelor of Science in Business Administration, he founded Community Storage and Properties, a local self-storage company that allowed Jason to invest in the redevelopment of Bellefontaine. He then founded an outdoor media company operating over 400 billboards in Ohio and Indiana. In 7 years, Jason and his business Small Nation team have helped to revitalize the city of Bellefontaine. Using their hustle hard approach, they have managed to renovate more than 30 historic buildings that have been sitting empty for decades, and then recruit tenants for 14 new business concepts. This created 18 new loft apartments, adding a crucial residential component back to the city's downtown. The combination of retail, restaurant, and residential have brought a small town main streets back to life. He is a member of the Small Business Council for the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Small Business and Entrepreneur Council, and serves on the Board of Trustees of Ohio Northern University. Jason, my sister, is also an alum of Ohio Northern University. We welcome you to our subcommittee meeting today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Joyce. And Mr. Nath, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer, Ranking Member Joyce, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Chad Nath. I'm born and raised in Iowa. Northwest Iowa is where I grew up and then settled down in the Grinnell area. I taught school for 7 years. I was a middle school special education teacher and a kindergarten teacher. And then after that, I went to Grinnell Regional Medical Center, where I held several different roles in that organization: emergency preparedness, safety security, incident commander for any events that had occurred, and then also public health. So, and then we also had a day camp program, which then made me change to my new career right now, which is I am the executive director of Link Grinnell. It's a nonprofit that was dreamed up on May 30th of 2019. And we knew that there was a huge demand and need for childcare in rural Iowa as well. So we had a study that had been done 4 years ago that identified that there were 500 children that did not have a designated home for childcare, and basically the need and demand was there. So we decided, I decided to leave the hospital in order to lead this venture. What we ended up doing was worked very hard and were very distinct on the name Link. So lead, inspire, nurture, and keep children active, engaged. So we're basically a cradle to career program. So we look at ways that we can enrich and provide services to children of all ages. We started with after school programs. So last year, about a year ago, we opened our doors and started providing care. And we saw that that was a huge benefit. Then all of a sudden in March is when COVID hit, and being someone that has done a lot of planning for hospitals, I know that the surge capacity for a hospital and long-term care facilities and first responders is desperate, and they need the staff to be focused and engaged with their patients and clients and that type of thing. So we pivoted from an after-school program to providing care for children of essential workers. We sent out a survey. We identified that there were 98 families filled out the survey. There were 163 children that were identified. And of that, if things got big, bad, and ugly with community spread, that there would be 86 children. So what that did in my emergency mind thinking was we needed to have capacity to have 86 children, and with groups smaller than 10. So what we ended up doing is we created what we call isolated pods. So we have no more than 10 individuals in each of these pods, and they're basically like a family unit. So they have a door, an entrance and an exit. They have restrooms, dedicated staff. With that, I needed facilities. So I talked to the state of Iowa, ended up getting a memorandum of agreements with 7 different facilities in order to basically contract or expand depending on the situation in the community spread. Now, we ended up seeing 37 children, and a majority of those were in one long-term care facility that in Poweshiek County, we had 166 positive cases as of today, and 83 were all from this one long-term care facility. So they got hit really hard. So we were taking care of their staff, children, and also hospital staff as well. We also continued that all the way to June 1st, where then we pivoted to allowing the public in as well. So we did a summer program that was 76 children. We ended up doing 6 isolated pods in 2 different facilities. We were able to, the school system has been wonderful in our area to allow us to utilize a lot. So in one, do 4 pods, and then able to do 2 pods. Now, all along, we have been making sure that we're disinfecting. We use PPE, all these different types of things in order to make this function and work appropriately. So I didn't get through everything. There's so many things to unpack and unwind with it, but you know, we did field trips. We did some other things that are pretty creative and unique, busing, cleaning the bus, and all those different types of things in order for that to happen. And then obviously derecho hit, and that Grinnell actually lost power for more than 12 days. And obviously you cannot have childcare during that time because of a lack of power. Although we did restore power 12 days later, and then the demand for childcare hit us again because our school year got pushed clear back. So they just started this Tuesday this week, and so we filled that gap as well. And now we did after school care this Tuesday, Wednesday, and then that's where I will go after this discussion. So,
well, thank you so much. You are a very busy guy and have been doing so much. So look forward to asking questions and hearing even more than during this hearing as well. And now we will go to Mr. Kettleson. You are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer and ranking members, Dr. Joyce, and distinguished members of the committee. I'm Jeremy Kettleson, Vice President of a family-owned Kettleson RV with locations in Hiawatha, DeSoto, Iowa. Our dealership was founded in 1962, and we roughly employ about 60 people. We sell new and used travel trailers, horse trailers, used motorhomes. We also provide repair services and property services to customers. It is our family's life work to enable people to enjoy the great outdoors and travel this great country. Our dealership is working hard to come back from the economic shock of the pandemic. We made progress, but challenges remain. Among our top concerns are keeping our customers and employees safe each day, inventory shortages, parts supply chain issues. We are very fortunate that we did not need to completely close our business this spring, but that is not the case in other states. RV dealerships in several states were open for service only, and only could transact sales by phone or web. And in some cases, RV dealers could not be open at all. So RVDA, RVIA, the Outdoor Recreational Roundtable, and several RV associations work to allow dealerships to remain open to serve the traveling public. The quick succession of state stay-at-home orders left some RV travelers stranded on the road, and some had to leave both public and private campgrounds due to the state and federal ordered closures. In the meantime, RV snowbirds who winter in the South had to travel back home to their home state, and it was vital that us as RV dealerships remained open to provide those services to get them home. In the early days of the pandemic, first responders, including medical personnel, law enforcement, and critical utility workers used RVs to self-quarantine in areas. In Iowa, workers at the Des Moines RV Waterworks utilized 20 RVs for temporary housing. As the assistant chief of small town Springville, Iowa, I've seen this firsthand and experienced it, and it is in our community's plan. With businesses' operations severely restricted, and a dealer survey conducted by RVDA in early April showed that 26% said their service, parts, and accessory business were down 75% or more when compared to level of business prior to the pandemic. Another 35% said that their fixed operations business was down 50 to 74%. 44% of dealers responding to the RVDA survey said that their RV sales volume was down 75% or more when compared with pre-pandemic levels, and 21% said that they were down 50 to 74%. With almost no revenue coming in, many dealers were forced to furlough or lay off, including ourselves. Because of crushing job losses throughout the country, the Small Business Administration PPP loan initiative offered forgivable loans to small businesses. At the time of the RVDA survey, 92% of RV dealers responding said that they either had or planned to apply for a PPP loan. While my dealership did not apply for the program, it has been important to many RV dealers across the country. Since those uncertain days of March, April, Americans have made it clear with the increase of business and enthusiasm towards the great outdoors that this is an industry that can help heal the nation during times like these. We are now faced with supply chain issues like many dealers in the country. Our inventory is down, and even more down after the derecho. These supply chain issues have the potential to create a storm after a storm. Manufacturing of RVs, which are primarily American made, cannot get components from suppliers and build the product. It will lead to a challenge because we do not have products to stock during the time the consumers are seeking the outdoor experience. Some areas that we are watching down the road include access to campgrounds, people's need for public and private places to camp in an RV or tent. We thank those of you who voted for the Great American Outdoors Act, which will help modernize and improve the public campgrounds in our national parks and forests and federal lands. Continual public investment in the outdoor recreation is extremely important to our country's future. Since the pandemic, we have seen an increase in younger and first-time buyers at our dealership and at dealerships across this country. In our conversation with these customers, we are finding that there are a lot of parents who are using the outdoors to reconnect with their families. They want to get away from the fear of the virus and spend time together as a family unit. We have been told by the public health officials to get outside, recreate responsibly. People are hearing that message loud and clear. Nature heals our body and mind. So on behalf of the $778 billion outdoor recreation industry and the RV industry, which has an overall economic impact of $114 billion and supports nearly 600,000 jobs, thank you for your support of a small business like mine and help millions of Americans enjoy the great outdoors. We will continue to be part of public health and the economic solution in our rural communities across this country.
Thank you, Mr. Kettleson. We really appreciate it and look forward to asking questions here in a few minutes. So thank you. And then I'd also now like to recognize Mr. Rembert. You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer, Ranking Member Joyce, and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Mark Rembert, and I'm the head of the Rural Innovation Network at the Center on Rural Innovation. I'm a regional economist by training with a focus on rural development, and I spent nearly a decade leading economic development efforts in my hometown of Wilmington, Ohio, following the Great Recession. It's a pleasure to be with you today to discuss the role of entrepreneurship in economic development. Even before the pandemic, rural America faced a crisis of economic opportunity. As recently as February 2020, more than 1,200 rural counties had not recovered all of the jobs lost during the Great Recession. This recent history suggests that the traditional approaches to rural development have not delivered economic prosperity on their own. Addressing the immediate economic issues faced by rural America is critical, but it's not enough. Restoring rural America to its pre-pandemic trajectory will mean that most rural communities will continue to lag behind. Rural America needs a new economic model. One key factor driving the rural opportunity gap has been the growth of the digital economy between 2002 and 2016, the share of jobs requiring digital skills quadrupled from 4.8% to 23%, and tech jobs experienced one of the fastest job growth rates from 2010 to 2016. Yet today, rural America is home to just 5% of the workers in tech occupations, even though it accounts for 15% of the total US workforce. At the Center for Rural Innovation, we believe that for rural communities to thrive, they must participate in the digital economy. Building digital economies in rural communities will require scalable tech startups that can create digital jobs in rural places. Supporting rural tech startups requires a different model than supporting Main Street businesses. Just like their metro counterparts, rural startups need access to equity-based risk capital, deep mentor and advisor networks, incubator and accelerator programs, and a trained digital workforce to draw upon. Yet in most rural communities, these resources are lacking or don't exist at all. There is a need for new economic development models and increased federal support to grow scalable entrepreneurship in rural communities. As the head of Corey's Rural Innovation Network, I have the pleasure of working with 18 rural communities in 17 states that are at the forefront of building tech-focused entrepreneurship ecosystems in rural areas. Communities like Red Wing, Minnesota, Durango, Colorado, Waterville, Maine, and Wilson, North Carolina are helping to lead the way by demonstrating that scalable tech entrepreneurship is possible in rural areas. The federal government has already played an important role in supporting the success of the communities like these in the Rural Innovation Network. Each community in the network has received technical assistance from Corey's sister organization, Rural Innovation Strategies Incorporated, through a cooperative agreement with the Economic Development Administration. RISI supports communities as they develop digital economic development strategies, and then provides assistance as they apply for the EDA's Build to Scale program, which was formerly the I-6 program. Last year, 3 out of the 8 communities that RISI supported received an I-6 grant to expand their digital economy ecosystem work. Even though not every community RISI works with wins a grant award, the technical assistance they receive still provides them with a strategy and a foundation from which they can continue to grow their digital economy. Other federal programs can also help accelerate scalable entrepreneurship in rural America. The SBA's Small Business Innovation Research Program has a strong track record of spurring job creation through innovation. In theory, the SBIR should offer a critical source of capital for rural tech entrepreneurs. Yet, just 3% of SBI awards have been made to firms located in rural communities. The Build to Scale and SBIR programs illustrate 2 key insights for the role the federal government can play in supporting tech entrepreneurship in rural communities. First, there should be more programs like Build to Scale that support the development of innovation-driven entrepreneurship ecosystems. We've seen firsthand how this program can accelerate the development of entrepreneurship ecosystems in rural communities. Second, the SBIR program shows that federal funding alone is not enough. Without technical assistance to promote access in rural areas, programs aimed at supporting scalable entrepreneurship are likely to end up concentrated in areas where tech jobs already exist. While there is still great uncertainty about the long-term effects of the pandemic, one thing that we know for sure is that rural America can't wait for the next recession to join the digital economy. In the age of the internet, there should be no limit to where digital economy jobs and scalable entrepreneurship can take place. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Rembert. I know I got real excited when you talked about Red Wing, Minnesota. They've got great walleye fishing up there. Speaking of outdoor activities, right, Mr. Kettleson? But look forward to asking you some questions too here down the line, just to hear even more about your expertise and ideas. Thank you, Mr. Rembert. And Mr. Duff, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Fickenauer, Ranking Member Joyce, and the distinguished members of the subcommittee. My name is Jason Duff, and I'm the founder of Small Nation. Established 14 years ago in Belle Fountain, Ohio, Small Nation was formed during our nation's economic crisis and is dedicated to investing in places, spaces, and dreams for small towns and entrepreneurs. Belle Fountain is a town of 13,000 people in Logan County, 60 miles northwest of Columbus, 25 miles from the nearest major interstate, and an hour from the closest metropolitan area. It is like many other important and valuable courthouse communities across the country. We have a strong commitment and reliance on agriculture, manufacturing, and tourism. We are rural and depend on the vibrancy of our local economy and jobs to generate taxes, which support our local government, schools, and our community's health and social safety nets. 80% of our downtown storefronts were vacant when I began my journey 14 years ago. Blight, crime, arson, and opioid abuse plagued our town. Working with city, county, and other local leaders, my team and I developed a vision and plan for how to restart our local economy that began with finding unique ways to reduce unemployment by investing in people as well as places. The kinds of new businesses which have flourished in our town include new dine-in restaurants, coffee shops, hair salons, shopping boutiques, Airbnbs, health and wellness studios, and locally owned professional offices and services. All of these businesses have thrived because of the fact that they belong to a supportive, growing, and innovative small business community. That community had to be created. Thankfully, we were introduced to organizations like the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the local Chamber of Commerce, historic preservation organizations like Heritage Ohio, and resources and grant from the Small Business Administration. COVID-19 and the ongoing pandemic poses unprecedented new set of challenges for small businesses as they strive towards recovery. McKinsey estimates that between 1.4 and 2.1 million small businesses could permanently close, and that estimate was based on just the first 4 months of the pandemic. The disruption has also created a host of new business opportunities and industries that small local businesses can play an important role and win against their multinational competitors. We have seen the creativity of American entrepreneurs in ways they prepare and deliver food, create and provide education and training, and using technology and video in ways that we never thought possible. We've also seen how businesses can set up and solve important health and safety needs during the pandemic. From creating masks, shields, and much needed PPE, businesses of all sizes are responding and willing to serve. Small businesses are all essential. At the heart of all of this are people who listen, solve problems, and create solutions and get paid for those solutions. A recent survey by GetApp shared that 92% of US small businesses have reinvented themselves during the pandemic, and that says a whole lot about this group of people. Small business owners are scrappy go-getters, and there's no quit in them. Here are some key recommendations. Let's work together to expand programs that support small businesses' financial resilience. While the PPP program and the EIDL programs provided much needed relief to many businesses, there's still so many micro businesses who have been left out. These micro businesses need access to capital to sustain, grow, and expand their businesses. For example, small businesses need a long-term recovery loan program with low interest rates and favorable payment terms. Federal policies could also incentivize and leverage the success of equity and debt-based crowdfunding to provide entrepreneurs and businesses with sustained source of capital to help them accelerate recovery and boost new business creation. Improved access to rural broadband. Now more than ever, we need to find ways to enhance the access, speed, and affordability of our rural broadband to everyone. The next great business idea, invention, or breakthrough can happen on that family farm, maker space, or independent specialty retail store. And the last is creating and expanding entrepreneurial ecosystems. We must continue to support business organizations and nonprofits who train, advocate, and bring entrepreneurs together. Organizations like the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Council, the U.S. Chamber, and the Small Business Administration. In closing, I want to thank the subcommittee for the opportunity to testify today. Now more than ever, we need to find ways to really own and define what it means to be small. Small is adaptive, nimble, and able to respond fast. It's the small ones in the small towns and neighborhoods everywhere that keep not only the economy, but the very spirit of our country alive and prospering. It's the mom and pops, the food we eat, the measure of good service, and the technology of the future. They are the people that create the beautiful things, share our knowledge, and build bigger, better, and stronger communities. Thank you for believing and supporting and making smart policies that support small business.
Well, thank you, Mr. Duff. I truly appreciate your testimony and hearing from you later today as well. And thank you all for sharing with us. We are going to now begin our question portion. And with that, I will begin by recognizing myself for 5 minutes. And my first question is to Mr. Nath from Grinnell. Mr. Nath, your work in childcare, especially, I mean, just hearing all that you've been doing for the last year since you started Link and had really gotten involved in the childcare sector is pretty extraordinary. And I know you dealt with challenges you were not expecting to have to deal with when you took over this endeavor. But can you speak to me about why it was important for you to enter the childcare sector, especially in a small town, and just some of the things that are a little bit different when it comes to childcare in rural areas versus our cities?
Well, thank you for the question. Yes, it's vital. So when we started Link, we went out to our organizations and they supported us. We asked for 2 years of funding, 100% donated dollars to start up Link to provide childcare. This brings in a physician, at the hospital, we've been looking for oncology for how long, and orthopedics, and the list goes on of different services, and you can't get those individuals in because the schools and childcare aren't there to support those individuals. Plus, people want that for their families and to help that community thrive. So we were fortunate and we were able to provide that essential childcare for free because we had those dollars that were donated in there. In order to have those people focused on the job they're doing, they need to make sure that these other worries are wiped away. And the only way to make a community thrive is to make sure that you have all those facets into place, along with opportunities for your family. And so that's why it was so critical and so important for us to do what we did in that situation.
That's so great to hear too, how, I mean, you tie in, it's not just when you're talking about small towns in particular, I mean, like you said, even in getting doctors in, being able to attract the right talent, so much of that has to do with the childcare that is available. And so thank you for recognizing that need. And it's something that, I mean, just underscores why this is such an important topic to be talking about on a committee like this too, as we're talking about rural development and making sure that we don't have those disparities across the country. And one other quick question for you before we move on to Mr. Kettleson here. So many of your workers, well, not many, the folks that work in Link and are literally the childcare workforce, they are also essential workers. And so could you speak about just a little bit about what hazard pay would mean to your workforce in particular and how that would be helpful or not?
Yeah, hazard pay would be critical in that situation. And these a lot of the individuals are in the instant you need them. And so DHS was really good about getting background checks and all those types of things back to us really quickly. But we're the front line of the front line. That was the thing that was very challenging, was to find a way to make sure that I kept my staff safe and the children safe during COVID. And knock on wood, luckily we have not had any instances where anybody's been positive, but we really adhered to some strict standards and made that work very well. So thank you for that question.
Thank you so much. And Mr. Kettleson, so one thing we talked about even more so this morning, even that was mentioned in your testimony as well, but I kind of want to flesh out here, the supply chain issue that you guys are running into, specifically in your industry in particular. What are some of the factors you see leading to that? And how would you feel, and would you find this to be a helpful type of thing to make sure that we are, I guess, drawing the lines together of what the needs are out there for manufacturing, and then the industries that are doing well during the pandemic that could, benefit from more manufacturing or, fixing the supply chain that you're running into right now?
A lot of our supply chain issues are derived from the fact of we went from zero during the COVID era timeframe where no one was thinking about recreation during those initial times to 120 miles an hour of even the public officials saying the best way to enjoy your family and recreate is to be outside. And it's difficult for any industry to go from zero to not only where they were, but and then put them into a growth spike. And that's a lot of what that supply chain has created, which is a unique problem, which is an exciting problem for the future.
Yeah. Well, and I know my time has expired, but when we had that discussion, it really did make me start thinking about the fact that, as certain industries have done well during the pandemic, we should be able to close those gaps and then give more opportunities to some of our manufacturers who may have slowed down in other areas. And then whether it's helping them retool to meet the needs that are there right now, or whatever we can do to kind of bridge that gap, I think we should be looking at trying to do that because, I know you're yes, you got hit on top of it with the derecho and all of that as well. So it's going to be a long road, but I'm very grateful for just your expertise and everything you talked about here today. So thank you, Mr. Kettleson. And I know my time expired. So with that, I now yield to Dr. Joyce for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Finkenauer. My questions will start with Mr. Jason Duff. At Bell Fountain, you told quite an amazing story. You've been able to revitalize your small community with a balance of government, nonprofit, and private organizations. You talked to us, Mr. Duff, about an 80% vacancy rate with blight and turning that around to develop restaurants and small businesses and residents as well. Do you think that your community specifically benefited from a tax base from an enjoyment of life, from the development of new small businesses, from your ability to turn around a blighted area, an 80% vacancy rate for your numbers, into a prosperous area?
Thank you for the question. The beginning of our journey began with recruiting that first business and that first entrepreneur that would take a risk on our town. And that happened to be an independent restaurant. Asking the community what we felt that we were missing to bring that traffic, that energy, that life. And luckily, an entrepreneur that made brick oven pizza that had multiple units decided to expand his business in our town. That was a big risk for him. But when that pizza place opened up, there were already 13 other pizza places in our town, but he had a distinct, unique recipe. He provided a unique customer experience, and we honored the historic building that was there and the legacy of the traffic and energy that it had 150 years ago. So that became the catalyst for seeing that energy, that life, and that traffic come back to our town. When the restaurant started, there were other specialty retail stores that saw that traffic and saw the energy and life and said, we want to be clustered around that too. And then later, as people saw the specialty retail stores, the downtown gym decided to open up. And then people just said, we want to live in the upper floors of that building. But now in the pandemic, what we're challenged with, so to answer your question, it did improve the tax base, and it improved the tax base significantly, not only for the employees that were working in the businesses, the business owners that were developing profitable businesses that they're earning income on, but the property values appreciated. And when the property values appreciated, that allowed more money to go back to local municipalities for our schools and for our area communities. So, the challenge now in the pandemic is that many of our downtown and independently owned restaurants have been forced to close. And so that industry in particular has really been challenged. And I think that we must work together to find programs that really help those independent restaurants be able to open back up and get their employees back engaged in working. And I know the PPP program and the EIDL program have been two successful measures on being able to do what it can do, but there's still more work that has to be done. So the thing that we're working on right now is identifying if restaurants are going to be slower to come back online, what are the new ways that we can bring that traffic and energy and life to our towns, and bringing that technology, that broadband, getting our buildings wired up, I think is going to be a huge step in the right direction.
Mr. Duff, what you achieved at Bell Fountain, is this a model for success in other rural communities? And are you looking to implement that in other rural communities?
Absolutely. We believe that the model starts with finding ways to buy and invest in historic buildings, actively recruit and identify people who are entrepreneurially minded. And those people do exist in towns. Those ideas need to be heard. And we need to connect those ideas with people, community banks, and investors that have resources. And once these ideas come online, those folks need ongoing mentorship, coaching, and support. And I believe this model is working and can help towns all across the country.
And thank you for being the conduit for joining those different groups together. My next question is for Mr. Chad Nath. Mr. Nath, you mentioned searching for funding through non-government sources in donations and grants and stipends. Approximately how many of your dollars were you able to make up from non-government sources?
From non-government sources. So we started off actually from our local businesses are the ones that actually supplied us with the dollars that we thrived on during that time. Not thrived, but we worked with. We did do a community block grant and the PPP. We did not get it in the first phase. And then we had just some of the people that were essential staff provided some donations. So those went into donated dollars. We didn't access a fee or process a fee. We allowed them, if they so chose, to give some dollars back, and we had a few that did that. Some just could not afford to do that. So those are the ways that we made this work. But we wrote grants all over the place, and from the Iowa Women's Foundation in in this area. We did 5210 dollars. We look for different ways that we could fund this and make this work. And luckily, at this point, we hopefully can see the clearing a little bit.
And I commend you for that. My final question is for Mr. Rembert. We've talked in this committee at length about bridging the digital divide for rural communities. We are committed to working for that. In your written testimony, you mentioned that each community has individual challenges with this task. From a federal level, we understand that the federal government needs to support these efforts without imposing a one-size-fits-all approach. Do you agree from your stance, from your perch, that a one-size-fits-all will not be successful as we continue to bridge that digital divide?
Yes, I think we find that rural communities each have specific assets and specific challenges that have to be addressed in unique ways to be successful in doing this, especially when we're talking about building entrepreneurship ecosystems that are really focused on building scalable companies. I think that in our experience, programs that sort of match resources with local capacity building that allow the solutions to be built from the community level up and then are matched with resources that can come in to really build the capacity of the community to advance a strategy is really where we think success can be achieved. Because in rural communities in particular, capacity is always going to be a significant constraint. And so to the extent that programs can actually build local capacity based on strategies and ideas that are developed by local leaders, I think that the federal government can play a really important role in doing that. So in that sense, having one solution that every community develops isn't necessarily the best if it's not building that local capacity leadership strategy that can bring local resources together to really advance a vision.
And again, we salute your commitment to the rural communities. Thank you, Chairwoman, and I yield the remainder of my time.
Thank you, Dr. Joyce. And the gentleman yields back. And now I'd like to recognize the gentlelady from Minnesota, Congresswoman Craig, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chairwoman. And before I get into my questions about COVID-19 and economic recovery, I want to recognize you specifically for all of your tremendous work on behalf of your constituents as you recover from the August derecho. So thank you for everything you've been doing. I've been following you and just wanted to recognize your work. In getting back to our panelists, I just want to say thank you for all of you for being with us today to talk about these topics. They've some of the same topics that have greatly impacted my constituents. And I want to first turn to Mr. Rembert for my question and tie it back to the work of an organization called Red Wing Ignite, a nonprofit that I'm proud to have in my district. Red Wing Ignite fuels economic development by working with key sectors of the community to spur innovation by supporting entrepreneurs, businesses, and students. As you mentioned in your testimony, and certainly Ignite has done this, in adapting to COVID-19, there's been adaptation through virtual webinars, online mentoring programs, and more to support entrepreneurs. However, in this time of remote working and online events, internet access to these entrepreneurial programs and support is essential. So can you talk just a little more deeply about how rural broadband fits into this work and how the Center on Rural Innovation is working to expand rural broadband so more entrepreneurs can access these services?
Yes, I mean, broadband is the sort of foundational infrastructure that is required to build tech startups in rural places. And so it's extremely critical. When we look at communities to work with, one of the things that we look for is, do they have broadband infrastructure in place? And, the fact is there are a lot of rural places that have great broadband, Red Wing being one of them. It has a fiber network, which is exceptional. So many rural communities are really equipped to start doing this work, but there are still significant parts of rural America that are not connected. And that's just that is an issue that we cannot wait to solve. It needs to be addressed, yesterday before this pandemic hit. And we're really seeing the effects of it now. As an organization, we help to raise awareness through our data and mapping research about the critical role of broadband and where there are gaps. And our sister organization, Rural Innovation Strategies Incorporated, does do specific work with rural communities that are developing, that need help developing broadband and fixing gaps in their broadband infrastructure. So, we definitely encourage the Congress to really focus on the need to bridge the digital divide around broadband in rural America.
I just want to stick with you for one more minute. In looking at the economic effects of COVID-19 and comparing it to the Great Recession, how's it the same and how's it different? And does that speak to any future of what the recovery and what entrepreneurial opportunities come out of that look like?
Yeah, so I think it's a little bit even too soon to say what this is going to look like. I mean, as an economist, I think that this is still an evolving situation. And so, what we've seen so far is that this recession actually looks quite different than the Great Recession. So in one way in particular, in the Great Recession, rural communities were actually much more severely impacted. So far in this economic crisis, rural communities have been somewhat have been less impacted, partly because they haven't necessarily experienced the same severity of outbreaks that more urbanized areas have. The question is, what will the long-term effects be? I don't think we quite know. In our own analysis of the most recent BLS data, it looks like the recovery is starting to slow in rural America before rural America has recovered the jobs lost since February. So, and the fact that rural America is predominantly has disproportionate employment among small businesses is a real risk too. And as we saw during the Great Recession, small businesses are much more vulnerable to these kind of shocks. And so that can have much longer term impacts in rural communities, which is one of the reasons why we think it's probably the case that rural America has not recovered from the Great Recession overall.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I didn't get to ask each of you a question, but Madam Chairwoman, it looks like my time is up, so I'll yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman. And with that, I will recognize the gentleman from Ohio, Ranking Member Chabot, who is the ranking member of the Small Business Committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I think, Mr. Kettleson, I'll go to you first if I can. You mentioned that one of your priorities is keeping your employees and your customers safe. And, one of the things that we've been considering is liability protection. So, for example, if you have a customer that comes in, tests positive, and God forbid, should they perish from the disease, that you might be a target of a lawsuit, or one of your employees comes down positive. They might say you didn't take every precaution and you end up getting sued. Now, you might have workers' comp in your state, but nonetheless, even if you ultimately prevail, even if you win, you lose because of the attorney's fees and all the costs involved. Any thoughts about whether we ought to be doing something in that area to protect small businesses like yourself from being targets of liability, either from a customer or from an employee?
And initially that was a major concern of what is our liability in this situation, or in this current scenario, and then future scenarios as well, and how do we plan that as a company to help mitigate or reduce those risks? And who do we turn to? And the people that we turned to obviously did not have great clear answers as well either, just due to it just being something that was unknown. So that is an area that comes up that we constantly are discussing as a business and as leadership, and even as the employees, on what kind of risk that we're willing to take.
We have been considering a second round, and that's been one of the stumbling blocks because one side thinks that we should have these protections in general, and the other side thinks we shouldn't. So that's one of the stumbling blocks. But let me shift over. I think Mr. Nath next. I have visited, I think, 60 plus small businesses in my community in trying to see how the PPP worked for them or how we could have done things differently, just how they're getting along. And several of them were in the childcare area. And, one of the things I've heard when they were allowed to reopen or, some were essential to begin with, but the bottom line is they had to have fewer children and they had some problem with some of the employees being concerned about their own health and other matters like that. Has that been an issue with you as far as the numbers of children that you can have? And do you see that evolving over time? And is PPP allowing you to maybe weather that? But, when do you become profitable again, I guess is what I'm asking.
So PPP, the hard part about that is, nobody knows the duration, so we just basically did a guesstimate of what we thought we would need. And it basically lasted for 2.5 payrolls, and we're bi-weekly. As far as that's why another round of that could be more beneficial, because then we can go off of the data and the information that we have. Staff-wise, under these emergency guidelines, we were able to get plenty of individuals to sign up and be able to be there in case things increased. We ended up with about $22,000 in revenue from the summer program, and our staff costs were about $78,000. So that's a shortfall of roughly $56,000. But again, we have local businesses that are supporting us in a way that I've had Grinnell College come up and say, hey, you need anything, let us know, we will donate to that. But again, it's a chicken or the egg type of situation with childcare. Those businesses, if they're not open, it's hard for them to support or generate revenue that can go to support childcare within the community. So there's a lot of complex situations.
Thank you very much. One more question into a fellow Buckeye here, Mr. Duff. Obviously, we had a pretty aggressive governor in clamping down on this and trying to keep the people safe and on masks and how many people you could come in and dining inside and outside. Any thoughts there? Anything that you'd like to see from here on that could be helpful to your businesses or others in your community?
Well, based on our COVID counts here in Logan County, we've had experienced more of a economic crisis that's been damaging health. And of course, every COVID case and every COVID death is a serious situation. But in my county here, in April, we were 31% unemployment. That's the highest in Ohio by 10 basis points. And a big part of that reason is that our Honda plants and our manufacturing plants that support automotive manufacturing were all closed. And so were so many of our independent businesses in our small towns and our recreation areas. And so that cost and the health crisis of what we're dealing with, that cost is also very significant. So I think that we need to be looking at strategies for how we look at health in more of a global perspective. That the virus is here, and we are going to continue to work on that. But I think the work that this committee is doing, and then all of us are here today, need to be focusing on the health crisis related to the economy and how we can get people safely back to work and businesses safely reopened.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Shabbat. And with that, I don't believe there are any more questions for today. And so we will conclude the hearing here, but I just want to say thank you again to all of our witnesses, Mr. Nath, Mr. Duff, Mr. Kettleson, Mr. Rembert, and also Ranking Member Dr. Joyce. Thank you. I think this might have been our first online official hearing, so we did it. But it would, yes, be much better to get to see everybody in person. And we hold out hope here that this can get under control, get vaccines, get everybody going again. But in the meantime, having these types of discussions are going to be really, really helpful for us as we come through a pandemic and figure out how to stimulate our economy again. And also not leave rural America behind as we do it. And so thank you for taking the time to really uplift some of the stuff that you're going through on the ground, your expertise. All of these things are important, whether it's the recreation space or whether it's childcare, or whether it's, trying to revitalize our small businesses and just the economic side of it as well. So this was a really helpful discussion. I think the members would agree here, and we're just very, very grateful. And we remain committed to listening and trying to figure out, what can we do more of that works? How can we fix what doesn't? And how can we, again, keep planning for the future here? It is my hope that, I continue to uplift this to my own leadership and to all the leaders, both in the House, the Senate, the White House, that we can come together here, put differences aside, get people out of their corners, and get together to make sure that we can keep responding to the needs of our small business owners, our essential workforce, and all the folks who are doing so much for our country right now, but are worried every single day about what the future looks like. And we need to make sure we are responsive to that. So I will continue to urge that as well. And I know this is, again, it's a great committee to be a part of. And I'm honored to get to be the chairwoman of this committee, or this subcommittee, because we do find common ground here. It's the way this is supposed to work. And we'll keep doing our best. And I know we are just very grateful for all of you guys on the ground doing yours as well. And again, I just want to say thank you and stay hopeful for the future here, even though I know there's a long way to go. And with that, we will conclude this hearing, and I'd ask unanimous consent that members have 5 legislative days to submit statements and supporting materials for the record. Without objection, so ordered. And if there is no further business to come before the subcommittee, we are adjourned. Thank you.